All right, Michael, let's get back to our red chips and blue chips series here. This week, we're going to tackle the defensive line. So we'll do defensive ends and defensive tackles here in this episode. And I'm really, really excited to get into this because this is one of my favorite position groups. I think it's one of the position groups that dictates who wins and loses games oftentimes. But before we get into the list of red chips, let's set the criteria because we always want to start from setting the criteria, and then that helps further explain why these guys are in the respective positions here. What, in your opinion, is the criteria for a defensive end, the difference between a red chip and a blue chip, and what goes into that?
Well, I think a couple factors, right? Does the guy alter the protection scheme? Does the protection have to go to him in all cases? Is he always unblockable by one person? Can he create negative plays that necessarily mean sacks? And most importantly, and this is really important, can he hurry the quarterback to throw the ball? Because often sacks are a result of no one's open. Hurries are a result of interceptions are created by hurries. So to me, it's a lot of that goes into it. And instead of sorting the linebackers, Russell Gary, is he a down guy? Is he an outside linebacker? I just basically lumped everybody who rushes the passer on a continual basis over 80% of the time into the defensive ends. I mean, you can call T.J. Watt a linebacker, right? But T.J. Watt's a true on-the-ball, come after the quarterback and pressure the quarterback and change the game. So in this list, there'll be some defensive ends, there'll be some linebackers, but what we're calling this is on-the-ball players.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense there because I was wondering because I saw T.J. Watt, not to spoil what's going to be coming up in the next segment with the blue chips, but yeah, I saw him on there. I was like, okay, that's interesting that some people list him as a linebacker, but we're going to put some of these on-ball guys at defensive end. So here are the red chips that Michael has for defensive ends in the NFL. Chandler Jones of the Las Vegas Raiders, newly acquired Chandler Jones there. He was in Arizona the past few seasons. Trey Hendrickson of the Cincinnati Bengals. You have Robert Quinn of the Chicago Bears, Cam Jordan of the New Orleans Saints, and Shaq Barrett of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And one thing I noticed here, Michael, with the defensive line group, as opposed to what we saw in the secondary with the linebackers, a whole lot more first-round picks in this group on your red chips list.
No doubt. I mean, this is a pedigree position. I mean, and that's why when you win titles, you've got a good defensive line. That's why the Purple People Eaters were going to the Super Bowl in Minnesota, the Steel Curtain with Pittsburgh, the Fearsome Foursome with the Rams, the Doomsday Defense, the all those teams, they have signature names to them because they were dominant here. And it's hard to get dominant here picking in the fourth or fifth round. To get a Charles Haley in the fourth round is a hard thing to do. To get a Max Crosby in the third round is a hard thing to do. So, or a fourth round. I mean, it takes a lot. So it's usually a pedigree position, and it's usually guys that understand how to play the position and not run past the quarterback. One of my pet peeves, I think I don't understand why more defensive line coaches don't have this at their practices. They all practice, get up the field, get going, but they don't practice not running past the quarterback. And as I've said many times on this podcast, the worst place to be in football is past the quarterback because he never turns and runs that way. Never. So now the game becomes 11 on 10. When Ndakwe runs past the quarterback, which he does on a continual basis, all the time, his defense is playing 10 on 11. And so it's a disadvantage, and you allow the quarterback to step up. I truly believe on every practice field there should be an area where all the players in the defensive line understand they have to get into the paint. And what is the paint? The paint's the outside shoulder of the guards from one side to the other, back 5 yards to the quarterback, like the free throw lane in basketball. We got to get into the paint, and if we're not in the paint, we can't affect the quarterback. And you judge players, can they get into the paint? So on this list, when you break it down, I mean, Chandler Jones, he had 10.5 sacks. He had 26 quarterback hurries last year. Top in the league, one of the top in the league. Troy Hendrickson, he had 39 quarterback hurries last year. 29 quarterback hurries. Robert Quinn had 18.5 sacks. He had 17 quarterback, and he had 13 tackles for loss. I mean, he bounced back tremendously. Yeah. He was a dud too. And what makes Quinn's year so sensational is he was never playing with the lead in that Chicago Bears Matt Nagy offense. I mean, he was always playing from behind, so he had to play run and pass, which people don't understand. It's a lot easier when you have the lead. That's what makes T.J. Watt's year last year so sensational because they were behind in so many games. Cam Jordan plays more of a 5 technique inside, but he's still so effective. 22 quarterback hits, hurries. And then Shaq Barrett. I think Shaq Barrett's the one guy. I put him here. I think you could have, I could have put Matt Judon. I could have put Hassan Riddick. I could have put Sam Hubbard of the Bengals, who I thought played really well, or Brian Burns of Carolina. I went with Barrett. He had 22 quarterback hits. I think he played well. Judon, to me, it was between Judon and Barrett. I settled on Barrett. I'm not sure I'm right, but to me, that's the group.
Yeah, Shaq Barrett, what makes him even more impressive is that he's an undrafted free agent in 2014. So this guy has really come up from being a guy who's on a practice squad and has turned himself into a really good player here and was one of the guys that helped the Tampa Bay Buccaneers win that Super Bowl a couple years ago. I want to get back to Chandler Jones, though, because the guy who has the most sacks since 2012 when he entered the league is Chandler Jones with 107 and a half here, 2-time first-team All-Pro. Now with the Raiders, giving them bookend pass rushers with himself and Max Crosby. How do you think that bodes for the Raiders here in 2022 with Chandler Jones now getting a little bit more help on that defensive line?
Well, if you're Josh McDaniels, you're saying to yourself, how can I make my defense really excel? What assets? Bill Walsh used to tell coaches all the time, put a stick-it note on your computer to ask yourself every morning, what assets do we have that we're not utilizing? And the assets that the Raiders have, it isn't in their secondary. It isn't a corner. It's with these two players. And how do you maximize their talent? Get the lead. Mm-hmm. The Raiders, if this time next year, or we're sitting in February, we're at the South Point and we're having dinner at Michael's, talking about the season. The Raiders have to be in the top 5 in first half point differential. And if they are, they'll make the playoffs, they'll make a deep run. If they're not, they won't. They have to take the mentality, we have to go into the first quarter and score. We've got to, instead of establishing the pass, establishing the run, we're going to establish the lead. We're going to play from in front. We're not saving anything for the third quarter. We're coming after your ass. Because now what that does, that allows Crosby and the great Chandler Jones to rush. I think these two will be dynamic, but they can be more dynamic and more divisive when they're able to play from in front.
4 of these 5 guys are 30-plus, which I thought was really interesting because typically with the red chips, blue chips, you think these are guys who are ascending. Maybe these guys are at the peak, and then now it's only going to be the dissension for their careers, but still really great players nonetheless here. Did that surprise you when you were putting this list together? I mean, Robert Quinn entering his age 32 season on a team that's in year 1 of a rebuild with the new general manager, Ryan Poles, out there in Chicago. Maybe Quinn's a trade candidate for one of these Super Bowl contenders to maybe hopefully get them over the top.
That's such a great question because I think we all look at pass rushers as guys run up the field. I mean, you'll watch college football on Saturday and you'll hear the announcers talk about, he's got speed around the edge. Well, you never really get there with just speed around the edge, right? It takes savvy. It takes the understanding how to work inside. Like, I don't understand why defensive line coaches don't – if I was a defense coordinator in the NFL, I would spend more time choreographing my rush than I would trying to do anything else. Like, if I've got Chandler Jones at right end and I've got Max Crosby at left end, then I got to make sure, Chandler, you're going high, I'm coming low. We're going to build up. We're going to contain this quarterback high low. Or I'm coming inside. You've got to run the edge a little bit so I force him out if he's left-handed. If the quarterback's right-handed, I'm coming inside. I want to force him to his left. And so it's got to be choreographed. And the guards get into the paint. We got to push the line back. So I think a lot of this comes down to experience, understanding how to set up the rush, understanding how to run the picks, run the games, understanding the timing that needs to be. It's not all just speed and athleticism.
Yeah, guys who set things up first quarter, then they come back and counter in the fourth quarter when the game is really on the line. I think those are the best pass rushers that do that and sequence some of those pass rushing moves and the hand usage. So many things go into being a good pass rusher other than, like you mentioned, just speed and raw athleticism. Here are the list of some of the guys who were runner-ups that didn't quite make the cut for your red chips. You mentioned Matthew Judon of the New England Patriots. Hassan Reddick, now with the Philadelphia Eagles, was recently in Carolina. Sam Hubbard of the Cincinnati Bengals. And then Brian Burns, who I really like, out there in Carolina. Speaking of raw athleticism, he's got a lot of horsepower there with that speed. Why did these guys not quite make the cut?
Well, like I said, I think it was between Shaq Barrett and Judon, so we could have gone 5A, 5B, right? I mean, Riddick had 11 sacks. Riddick, the last 2 seasons, have been one of the best rushers in football. He's played with more power. He understands the game. When he first got in the league, he was a fish out of water.
Yeah.
It wasn't until his last year at Arizona they've got a lot out of him. And last year he had 12 quarterback. He had tackles for loss. He had 12. He had 18 quarterback hurries, and he had 11 sacks. I mean, Hubbard and Burns both, were able to affect the quarterback. They created negative plays and they sacked. I think they're on the cusp. I think once Burns, with the Panthers, I mean, as I've said this many times, the Panthers are more talented than a 5-win team. That's not a knock on Matt Rule. That's just a knock on they've just got to come together and play with more stability at quarterback. But if they get the lead on people and Burns is able to stay on the field and they get that one extra guy on the other side, if they sign Carlos Dunlap or somebody else to go along with it, with Brown inside, I think, and other players, I think they can be equally effective. I think Burns is a rising star.
Yeah, Burns and Reddick, a couple other first-round picks there. Reddick was to the Arizona Cardinals, ended up in Carolina, now in Philadelphia. Burns with Carolina, of course, out of Florida State. Let's get to the defensive tackles. We talked about these guys who are the pass rushers, a little bit more sexier, the athleticism guys, but the defensive tackles, these are the guys who push the pocket. And your red chips list for defensive tackles in the NFL, Javon Hargrave of the Philadelphia Eagles, DJ Jones, now of the Denver Broncos, last played with the San Francisco 49ers, Vita Vea, which is one of my 5 favorite players who's not a Cowboy in the NFL, Cameron Hayward of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Christian Wilkins of the Miami Dolphins. The defensive tackle position oftentimes overlooked because they don't rack up the stats. But we talked during the draft, and you mentioned how Jordan Davis of Georgia is a guy that you really coveted highly. Is this a position that you think is underrated by the masses?
It is. It's underrated, and it's also really not coached to the level that it can really excel. Vita Vea is a great pass rusher.
Oh, I love him.
Now, Vita Vea had 5 tackles for losses and 4 sacks. How's that a great pass rusher? He had 12 quarterback hurries. Well, because he affects the game without it showing up in the stat sheet. When he pushes the guard back into the quarterback's face and the quarterback can't step up, he gets no credit for that at all. But yet he affects the game. I mean, to me, his ability to power back. No, we're not going to the beach. You don't need your swim trunks. We're not going arm over. We're going to power back, right? No suntan lotion for you. Just keep pushing the guard back. I think that's what they do. Hargrave, I thought at the beginning of the year was really good. I thought he slightly declined towards the end. But in fairness to Hargrave, he wasn't playing in a disruptive scheme that I think he needed to play in. I think he can really become even better this year. Fletcher Cox wasn't the same player. He's not going to be on this list. Hayward, to me, is so steady. 10 quarterback sacks, 15 tackles for losses, gets a bunch of hurries. And Wilkins is kind of a quiet, unknown guy drafted by the Miami Dolphins. He only had 4.5 sacks, but he makes plays, and he's strong against the run. And it takes 2 people, really, if you get a light-ass guard, these tackles are going to push that guard back. So you've got to be able to protect inside out. Inside out is the key to pass protection. We've got to be able to force everybody to run around a long edge. And if you can keep guards sturdy on the line of scrimmage, you'll throw the football effectively. It's guys like Wilkins. DJ Jones, to me, go back and watch that Cowboy game.
I don't want to.
He was sensational in that game. I know you don't. I mean, he was sensational. And I think they do as good a job coaching D-line in San Francisco as any team in the National Football League.
Yeah, and that was a question I was going to ask you, especially when we got into the blue chips, because you'll see it's a lot of guys who are either used to be with the Niners or are still on the Niners right now, because the defensive line seems to be their position of strength, and they hit it out of the park with a lot of these draft picks. Back to Vita Vea, though, because he's near and dear to my heart. I'm a Washington Husky fan. He played at University of Washington. One of the most dominant performances I've ever seen is the 2017 Apple Cup. He was tossing guys into the quarterback. And it was just like one guy who wasn't really racking up stats, but you can see it's so evident when you watch the game that he was clearly the best player on the field. And he has that freakish ability at 6'4", 347 pounds, running a sub 5 second 40. He used to play running back in high school. Like, that just goes to show you what kind of athlete he is and what kind of impact he can have on the field. Now, Cam Hayward, to me, he's the elder statesman of this group. 33 years old, entering his 12th year in the league, 3-time first-team All-Pro. How much do you think he has left in the tank here with this Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line?
He still plays good. He's still hard to block one-on-one. He still understands how to get off blocks, make plays, has tackles for losses. He fits the scheme perfectly. To me, I haven't seen a decline in his play. And look, his job is to help T.J. Watt, Highsmith come around the corner and get pressure. He does that really well. So I think as he gets older, he's not declined whatsoever.
The guys who are runner-ups for defensive tackles here that didn't quite make the red chip list, we have J.J. Watt of the Arizona Cardinals and then Kenny Clark of the Green Bay Packers. J.J. Watt, clearly, if this was 5-6 years ago, would have been on the blue chips list. He's another guy who's a three-time three-time defensive player of the year, many first-team All-Pros for J.J. Watt there.
He just can't. TJ can't stay healthy.
Yeah,
JJ can't. It's hard for him.
Yeah. He's in a great shape. I saw the photos a couple of weeks ago. He looks like he's in awesome shape, but if he can stay healthy, he can be productive for that Arizona Cardinals team that's really going to need him with Chandler Jones now here in Las Vegas. Thanks for watching the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi. And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to VSiN Live and the GM Shuffle podcast with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN, wherever you get your podcasts.